Another round of flooding has drenched southwestern China. At Yangtze River's Chongqing section, the water level rose an additional 17 feet within 24 hours. 15 Chinese scholars visiting the U.S. lost their jobs and visas in one day. The hosting university cut ties with the CCP-backed agency that funds them. The U.S. is seeking to form a NATO-like defense alliance in the India-Pacific region with the aim of countering China. The mayor of a Prague district wrote an angry letter to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang, calling him an unmannered, rude clown. This after Wang threatened Czech Senate Speaker, who is visiting Taiwan right now. And the U.S. is launching new economic talks with Taiwan. A State Department official said the U.S. is making significant adjustments to its relations with the island. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Another round of flooding has drenched southwestern China. Heavy rain sent the water level soaring in Tuesday in the upper reaches of the Yangtze River. Its tributaries in Sichuan province and other areas are also affected. In the Yangtze River's Chongqing section, the water level rose an additional 17 feet within 24 hours on Monday. Floodwaters are also pouring out of the Three Gorges Dam, located in the middle reaches of the river. It's releasing water at a rate of over 30,000 cubic meters per second. Red level warnings for heavy rain were issued in some areas. That's as many rivers again reached or exceeded their overflow warning levels. On Sunday, a mountain landslide blocked roads in Sichuan province. One video captured an excavator at work, while a landslide continued behind it. Parts of Chengdu, the capital city of Sichuan, were flooded on Sunday and Monday. The onslaught submerged streets and damaged property. Some locals described it as something not seen in 100 years. A video captured muddy floodwaters pooling into a house via windows and doors. It even showed one family's dinner still cooking as rising water threatens to submerge the stove. Because the city was built in a mountainous area, the floodwater was receding relatively quickly. But the mess it left behind won't dissipate so easily. The pandemic has forced the world outside China to question the accuracy of data coming from China and more closely examine the gap between the truth and the Chinese Communist Party's narrative. That skepticism extends to the economy, but some Chinese people already set their escape plans in motion years ago.
For years, some southern European countries have employed what's called golden visa or golden passport programs. The programs allow those from outside the EU to gain long-term visas or even become naturalized citizens of those countries simply by buying real estate there. Countries that have adopted the policy include Spain, Portugal, Cyprus, Greece, and Malta. Historically, Chinese citizens have almost always made up the largest percentage of those who use it. According to Arabic news network Al Jazeera, leaked documents known as the Cyprus Papers recently exposed that more than one-third of golden passports issued by the country of Cyprus from 2017 to 2019 went to Chinese people. Cyprus Golden Passport allows visa-free entry into more than 20 EU countries, including Germany and France. It's an ideal springboard for wealthy Chinese looking to immigrate. Among those who obtain the passports, information about 8 of them has been released publicly. Billionaire businesswoman Yang Huiyan, the richest woman in Asia, is one of them. Yang owns a property development company based in South China and has business dealings throughout the country. According to Forbes' 2020 ranking of the world's richest women, Yang is ranked number 6, with estimated assets worth over $20 billion. The passport list also includes multiple members of China's National People's Congress and members of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. The practice is kept quiet in those circles, as Chinese politicians aren't allowed to change their nationalities while holding positions in the regime. Also on the list, the president of the state-owned power company, China Resources Power, and 2 convicted businessmen, Zhang Keqiang and Li Jiadong. Zhang was previously sentenced to 4 years in prison for bribery. Li was sanctioned by the U.S. for laundering more than $100 million for a North Korean cyber hacking group. The document also notes 11 other Chinese applicants, but their names have not been made public. Based on related data, those 11 include CEOs, the former heads of an investment bank, and a chief information officer from a Hong Kong pharmaceutical company. Impacted by financial crisis, the Mediterranean country of Cyprus launched its investment immigration program. It was designed to encourage non-citizens to buy property there and invest a minimum of just over 2 million euros in order to receive a golden passport. That's a great deal for many Chinese Communist Party or CCP officials and businessmen. One Chinese businessman, Mr. Zhang, told Radio Free Asia it's risky to live in China now. He explained that the risk is a result of CCP leaders' madness and impulsiveness. It will turn the wealth people have been accumulating for decades into ashes. No one can afford to lose like that. Nobody will gamble their family and fortune on Beijing's madness. While some of China's wealthy make use of the opportunity, less wealthy people struggle to find cheaper ways to leave the mainland. Ms. Sun is a former resident of Guangdong province. She likens herself to what government calls the lower end of the population. A month ago, she managed to cross the border with her 11-year-old child and found herself in a small country in southeastern Europe. She told Radio Free Asia that China's boat is sinking and it's past the point of no return. She said she'd been planning her escape for 3 months.
Chinese prisoners may have been used to make masks in a Canadian-owned factory earlier this year. The company says the Chinese Communist Party had taken over the factory at that time.
A Canadian company that makes medical masks says the Chinese Communist Party took control of its facility in Shanghai earlier this year. A report by a Chinese publication claims prison labor was used to produce the masks during that time. China state media Shanghai Daily reported in March that a special group of offenders in the Chinese prison labor system volunteered to make masks at the Canadian-owned Medicom facility in Shanghai. The article that was first reported on by Blacklock's reporter last week has since been taken down. Canada gave Medicom a sole source contract to make masks during the pandemic, meaning they were Canada's only supplier. Medicom's vice president of marketing told the Epoch Times that Medicom wasn't under its own control from late January to late March, the article claiming prison labor was used and was published during that time. She said the Chinese government controlled all production and operations. Every mask made in the facility during that period was appropriated for domestic use in China. She said none of the masks made under the Chinese state control were delivered to Canada.
A new report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI, says the CCP is increasingly deploying coercive diplomacy against foreign governments and companies. The report, titled The Chinese Communist Party's Coercive Diplomacy, describes over 150 cases of coercive diplomacy in nearly 30 countries over the past decade. According to the report, there's been a sharp escalation in these tactics since 2018. The countries and regions with the most recorded instances include Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, and East Asia. According to the report, the coercive tactics include economic measures like trade sanctions and tourism bans, and non-economic like arbitrary detention, restrictions on official travel, and state-issued threats. The research draws on media, policy papers, academic research, and government reports to identify the CCP methods of coercion through trade sanctions and threats. The report also found a sharp rise in threats after the pandemic began. The report states China is the largest trading partner for nearly 2/3 of the world's countries. But foreign governments' growing dependency on the Chinese market increases its successful coercion efforts. But the report suggests a solution for other countries to counter the CCP's coercive diplomacy through a coordinated and sustained international effort. It adds that a number of foreign governments, including those of Australia, Canada, Japan, India, the UK, and the US, are working on ways to develop an effective counter-coercion strategy. The Czech Republic's second highest official is visiting Taiwan. It's a show of support for the island's independence, but the Chinese regime is condemning the trip.
The head of the Czech Senate declared himself symbolically Taiwanese in a speech at Taiwan's parliament on Tuesday. He said that John F. Kennedy, in his famous "I'm a Berliner" speech, clearly opposed communism and political oppression and supported the people of West Berlin. Kennedy said freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. The Czech politician expressed a similar idea.
Please let me also express in person my support for Taiwan and the ultimate value of freedom and conclude today's speech at your legislative yuan in Taiwan with perhaps a more humble but equally strong statement. I am a Taiwanese. I am a Taiwanese.
Beijing has threatened to make the Czech Senate Speaker pay a heavy price for visiting Taiwan. The Czech Republic, like most countries, has no formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Taiwan only has 15 formal allies due to China's diplomatic isolation. The Chinese Communist Party strongly objects to any official contact between its diplomatic allies and Taiwan's officials. But the Czech Republic's second highest ranking official says it's his obligation to defend democracy.
I am convinced that it is the duty and obligation of every democratic country to support everyone who defends democratic principles and who oftentimes build democracy under difficult conditions.
The visit is also in direct opposition to the Czech president, who has adopted strong pro-China views.
The mayor of a Prague district on Monday wrote an angry letter to the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang, calling him a bad-mannered, rude clown. This after the Chinese official threatened the Czech Senate Speaker. Wang warned that the top Czech official would pay a heavy price for his ongoing visit to Taiwan. The mayor demanded that Wang apologize right now for the threat and called on him to wake up because, quote, that reaction from our side will be the same even if you had invested 14 times more than our friends from Taiwan. The mayor also took aim at Czechia's pro-Beijing president Milos Zeman, calling him not very sane. The Czech president has pushed for closer ties with China since taking office in 2013. A Pew Research survey shows that the Czech public's opinion on China has soared in recent years. 57% hold an unfavorable view of China. The U.S. is launching new economic talks with Taiwan. A State Department official announced the decision on Monday, saying that the U.S. is making significant adjustments to its relations with Taiwan within the boundaries of the One China policy.
The State Department's top diplomat for East Asia, David Stilwell, announced the new economic dialogue between the U.S. and Taiwan. He said the talks will explore the full spectrum of the economic relationship with technology at the core. The expansion of economic ties between the two came as U.S.-China relations have deteriorated to the worst level in decades. China is also increasing its threat to forcefully take over the self-ruled island of Taiwan. The Assistant Secretary of State announced the talks on Monday in a virtual forum by the Heritage Foundation. He said the U.S. is making significant adjustments to its relations with Taiwan, but that they are within the boundaries of the One China policy. He added that the U.S. is compelled to make the changes to reflect deepening ties between the U.S. and Taiwan and to counter Beijing's increasing threat.
In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has targeted Taiwan with diplomatic isolation, bellicose military threats and actions, cyber hacks, economic pressure, United Front interference activities. These actions challenge the peace and stability in the Western Pacific. So let's be clear, these destabilizing actions come from Beijing, not from Taipei or Washington.
He said Hong Kong is the perfect case for why Beijing cannot be trusted to keep his promise.
Looking at Hong Kong, it is clear that Beijing is willing to disregard the international obligations to extend its authoritarian system and box in freedom-loving people. We no longer have the luxury of assuming that Beijing will live up to peacefully resolve its differences by Taipei, as it promised us in 3 communiques.
The U.S. official also clarified that the One China policy upheld by the U.S. is different from Beijing's One China principle, which asserts sovereignty over Taiwan. Instead, the U.S. takes no position on sovereignty over Taiwan. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson denounced Stilwell's remarks in a press briefing on Tuesday, calling them meant to confuse right and wrong. Last week, the Taiwanese government lifted a ban on imports of U.S. beef and pork. The move received mixed response in Taiwan, but was seen as an effort by Taipei to clear the obstacle for free trade talks with the Trump administration. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Now we turn to Germany. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang is visiting Berlin and talked with his German counterpart Heiko Maas about some sensitive issues.
We
won't allow it to become the plaything of a superpower competition between the United States, Russia, and China. We want to be in dialogue with everyone.
As the most important country in the EU, Germany talked about Europe's call for fair and democratic elections to take place quickly in Hong Kong and for the national security law in the region to be revoked.
Our common European appeal remains the call for quick and uninhibited elections for the Legislative Council and that the restrictions on the security law be lifted. We Europeans agree on that.
Maas also said that threats have no place, referring to a conflict between Beijing and the Czech Republic because of a visit to Taiwan by the Czech Senate Speaker. Wang said the top Czech official will pay a heavy price for it.
We Europeans act in very close cooperation on foreign and security policy issues, and we treat our international partners with respect. We expect the same from them, and threats have no place here.
Maas also said Wang had indicated a readiness to allow access to an independent monitoring mission of the United Nations to camps in Xinjiang housing Muslim Uyghurs. A prominent Hong Kong activist says Germany has a special responsibility to defend democratic values and freedom. NTD's Germany correspondent Christian Watson has the story.
On the same day that the Chinese foreign minister visited Berlin, prominent Hong Kong activist Nathan Law came to the German capital. He had a message for Germany: less talk, more action.
Well, it's important that we keep reminding the German public and the government that the appeasement strategy that they've been using, the dialogue-based diplomacy, is not working.
Other countries like the US and the UK have recently taken steps to confront China's growing authoritarianism. But Germany traditionally treads cautiously with Beijing. In Berlin, Law joined forces with German lawmakers who are part of a global coalition. The Interparliamentary Alliance on China advocates a new approach toward the CCP. Law went into self-imposed exile in London after Beijing imposed the so-called national security law on the city. He's now reportedly sought under the law, accused of inciting secession and collusion with foreign and external forces. Law and his allies want to see Europe imposing sanctions on Hong Kong officials who violate human rights, following the lead of the US. Additionally, he said lifeboat plans are crucial. Those would make it easier for Hong Kongers to seek asylum or gain visas.
So I hope that this could be implemented by Germany, and Germany could take the lead to change the Europe in terms of China policy.
So far, as the only tangible step, Germany suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong. And some observers say the EU is unlikely to agree on a joint China policy in the near future. In Berlin, Law joined groups like Uyghurs and Tibetans that are persecuted in China for protest in front of the German Foreign Affairs Ministry.
And we fight this long battle together until we conquer, until democracy prevails, and until every single one of us have our freedom and our basic human rights again.
He said the deteriorating situation in Hong Kong should serve as a wake-up call for Western democracies, and that Germany's own experience with totalitarianism gives it a special responsibility to defend democratic values and freedom. Reporting by Christian Watson, NTD News, Berlin.
A U.S. university has expelled 15 visiting scholars from China. This as the university cuts ties with the Chinese regime organization that funds them. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
15 Chinese scholars working at the University of North Texas are now packing up to leave the U.S. Last Wednesday, the university emailed the scholars saying that it had cut ties with the Chinese fund that sponsors them. The researchers' visas were revoked on the same day. A Twitter user posted the notice online. It says the scholars can't access the university emails, servers, and other materials. They can return to the campus to collect personal items, but must arrange to be accompanied. The U.S. is tightening controls to tackle Chinese theft of intellectual property. Last Friday, the Justice Department said 2 Chinese researchers were arrested. One of them was charged with stealing trade secrets. Washington said the communist regime has been using Chinese students to steal American intellectual property. This May, President Trump banned Chinese graduate students with military ties from entering the U.S. The expelled Chinese scholars were funded by the Chinese Scholarship Council. The organization provides scholarships for Chinese researchers working overseas, and the money comes from the Chinese regime. The university didn't give a reason for the move. It did point out in a tweet that the decision is limited to visiting researchers funded by this particular organization, and that the UNT continues to welcome visiting scholars from around the world, including China. A person who claims to be a former student started an online petition asking the university to overturn the decision. Juliet Song, NTD News.
The Trump administration is cracking down on China's intellectual property theft. A top official says new measures could be rolled out soon.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says President Trump is looking into ways to prevent intellectual property theft by Chinese nationals and students. In an interview with a DC radio show, Pompeo said the Chinese Communist Party has stolen hundreds of billions of dollars of intellectual property, and with that, tens and hundreds of thousands of American jobs. They've stolen this information either by taking it through cyber means or by their people actively working inside of our places of research. Pompeo said previous administrations have turned a blind eye, and President Trump is the first to take it seriously. One of the hosts asked whether all Chinese students and researchers might be barred from the United States for a few years. Pompeo said not every Chinese student can be considered a spy, but it's absolutely the case that the CCP is surveilling Chinese students to make sure they're acting in line with what the CCP wants them to do. He said the measures could be rolled out over the coming weeks or months.
2 Chinese researchers have been arrested on federal charges while attempting to board China-bound flights. They allegedly have ties to the Chinese military. One of the arrested is a visiting scholar at UCLA. They were charged with destroying evidence to obstruct an FBI investigation. The Bureau began investigating him in July amid suspicions of visa fraud and that he might be transferring sensitive information to the Chinese military. He also allegedly lied to custom officials when asked whether he had ever had contact with the Chinese consulate in LA. But phone records, email exchanges, and other evidence found later showed that he had asked the consulate about the possibility of flying back to China on a chartered plane. The U.S. is looking to form a defense alliance in the Indo-Pacific region, similar to NATO. If formed, it would aim to counter China. A State Department official says high-level authorities from India, U.S., Australia, and Japan will meet in Delhi this fall for talks.
The U.S. aims to form a NATO-like defense alliance in the Indo-Pacific. That's according to the U.S. State Department's number 2 official.
The Indo-Pacific region is actually lacking in strong multilateral structures. They don't have anything of the fortitude of NATO or the European Union. There is certainly an invitation there at some point to formalize a structure like this.
The alliance would be based on the U.S. current strategic ties with India, Japan, and Australia, also known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad. But the U.S. official says the participants could expand beyond that.
The Quad isn't exclusive. I think there's plenty of reason to bring in other countries into this discussion as well. But remember, even NATO started with relatively modest expectations, and a number of countries chose neutrality over NATO membership in post-World War II Europe.
Experts see the move as implicitly aiming to counter China in the Indo-Pacific, but the official says Beijing is not their only goal.
I don't think responding to the threat of China in and of itself, or any potential challenge from China in and of itself, would be enough of a driver, though. It also has to have a positive agenda.
He said that high-level officials from the 4 countries will meet in India this fall. China views the Quad-country alliance with suspicion. Any country that sides with the West, especially the U.S., often faces scrutiny from the Chinese regime. Now, amid the pandemic and China's border clashes with India, all 4 members' relations with Beijing are now in decline. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.